Okay, so let's talk about high cushion shoes and how they actually cause more damage for your runners. Now, I can't count how many people have told me that they love running in Hokas. Patients will tell me they love really cushiony shoes or shoes that give them a lot of cushion under their feet when they run, and that it is so great to run in them because they feel comfortable. They can run longer. They can run longer distances without pain. It's not as much wear and tear on their body, and it's just so great for them. And I used to recommend these for patients all the time. I used to tell patients to go get really, really cushiony shoes, especially if they had things like OA or if they had a lot of wear and tear in their joints, or if they were an excessive heel striker or potentially doing some other gait deviations we'll talk about in a little bit. But it is actually not the case. Unfortunately, high cushion shoes actually cause more damage to patients' musculoskeletal systems than we previously thought. And this is some of the new research that's come out. In fact, the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine talked about an article discussing how they had runners run in high cushion shoes and in neutral shoes, and found that the high cushion shoes had more impact going through the lower extremities. And this is contrary to what PTs have recommended in the past. The advice we've given to patients in the past is exactly the same thing I was telling patients. Run in cushy shoes, make sure that you have nice and support, make sure that you're not causing more stress through your lower extremities. It'll help you go further. So while this new research came out, it was a little bit mind-blowing for many of us in the community because we said, oh, well, what I've recommended to patients in the past is not unfortunately good for them. So now what we're finding is that those runners that are running in those cushiony shoes, unfortunately, are getting more impact or more ground reaction forces sent through their lower extremities and through their bodies. So what do we do with this new information? Well, it's important to go back and talk a little bit about shoes and what shoes might be beneficial for patients, why this is occurring, and what we can do to help patients find the right shoes. So let's start with talking about shoes and what makes up a high cushiony shoe. And there's a lot of variables with shoes, and I'll have to go over it in a little bit of a different time because while there's so many different variables, I want to orient us to cushion and that anatomical feature of shoes today. So cushion or high cushion can also be called absorption, or sometimes it gets mixed in with calling a maximally supportive shoe or a shoe that has max support. And so all these things are describing a shoe that is basically doing a lot of work for the patient or for the runner. Oftentimes, high absorption shoes also come with, or high cushion shoes also come with a lot of arch support, or maybe they come with some ridge sole features so that you don't overpronate or you don't do excessive supination. As I said, there's a lot of different things that come with shoes, and while I don't want to veer off and talk about all the different anatomical features of shoes during this session today, I do want to make sure that we can go over cushion and how that is relevant. So let's get back to our topic a little bit more and talk about specifically high cushion shoes and why we're actually finding that these high cushion shoes are not as good for our runners or are causing more impact for our runners. Now, one of the things that we think about is the fact that in high cushion shoes, they found that the runners are actually just running harder. I like to think of myself running, and I like to put myself in place in terms of research when I'm listening to research or if I'm reading research. And I thought to myself, well, why do these high cushion shoes maybe cause more impact? Well, what they found was that when people were running in these high cushion shoes, they would just run harder. They would not have that sensation of hitting the ground because now they have all this absorption underneath their feet. Kind of like driving in a car that has really, really plush shocks or really, really smooth shocks. You don't really slow down for all the speed bumps as much, or you maybe don't slow down for the potholes as much because you just don't feel them as much. And when you don't feel it, then you tend to just go a little faster, or you tend to run a little bit harder. And so with those runners in those max support shoes, they were running harder because they didn't really feel the ground pounding up into their feet. However, as we all know, if you're landing on the ground, you're not going to dissipate force or dissipate energy. All that force and energy will still go through your body. It just might be a little more gentle when you land on the ground. But it doesn't necessarily mean your knees, your ankles, your hips, your back isn't taking all that force, all that stress through your body or from the ground. So what we see is that these runners, especially when we looked at the research, these runners, they would run harder, and specifically they would do a couple key gait deviations. Because running harder is kind of a layman's way of just saying they ran maybe with different form or with a decreased efficiency or a decreased beneficial form in terms of stress on their lower extremities and on their bodies. So what is the actual things that they found? Well, one of the things that they found was that these patients tend to have a longer stride. And that longer stride usually presented with two things. It presented with a very apparent heel strike, oftentimes with excessive dorsiflexion. And while heel strikes aren't necessarily bad, heel strike does increase the force sent through the body because it can obviously cause a braking force or an increased ground reaction force. The other thing that they saw was these patients were oftentimes doing what's called overstriding. Overstriding is when your foot lands in front of your hip a certain amount. Now there's ranges that we're okay with and comfortable with, but what we found was that these runners, their foot was landing so far in front of their hip that it was causing a lot more force to go through their body. And so the overstriding, the heel strike patterns cause these patients to have increased ground reaction forces, again, because they were just running harder in general. Now, if you're like me, you read research or listen to research or get new information and you say, well, how do I adapt my clinical reasoning? How do I tell my patients something different that's going to help them? What can I do to make this research put into action? And you might be thinking to yourself, well, if you're telling me high cushion shoes aren't good for my patients, I'm going to go back to telling them to be in minimal shoes. They should run in minimal shoes. It will make them get off their feet as much. They won't pound into the ground. Plus, people like minimal shoes. They're lighter. They feel good. They feel nice and sleek. Maybe that's the way to go. Well, not so fast. Because you might think minimal shoes could be a good way to go, but remember, minimal shoes still have a lot of impact and a lot of stress through the lower extremities and through the body. We still see that minimal shoes have high ground reaction forces. So that may not be the answer. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, you told me not to give them high cushion shoes. Now you're telling me not to give them minimal cushion shoes. What shoes can I give? Should I tell them to go barefoot? Don't tell them to go barefoot. What we usually see is that most runners benefit from a moderate cushion shoe or a neutral shoe. And really something that isn't overly maximally cushiony, isn't high absorption, and also isn't things like a really high heel drop, or isn't a really high stack height, or isn't a lot of support. Overly supportive shoes or max supportive shoes actually tend to do more damage because they're providing so much correction. More on that another day. But I do want to give you a couple shoes that can really help. If you're looking for shoes to recommend to runners, I want to give you 3 that you can start from that are under these guidelines of kind of that neutral, moderately cushiony, and moderately supportive. So one that I do like, the New Balance 1080s are a great shoe. These are a neutral shoe and they have a moderate heel drop and a moderate arch height. They also have the benefit of having some wide foot options. They're not really expensive shoes. They're very approachable. Most retailers are going to have them. And again, they're a really good neutral shoe that people can run in and hopefully not get hurt. Another shoe out there, which is a little higher on the price point, are called the Saucony Rides. And while I don't have an affiliation with any shoes or shoe brands or anything like that, I want to help people get into the right shoes because there's so much misinformation out there when it comes to shoes. The Saucony Rides are neutral, moderate heel drop as well, moderate arch support as well. These ones are a little more lightweight. So they're a nice lightweight shoe that they can run in, and I personally have run in these shoes before. I do like them. I own some New Balances as well, some Mizunos as well, and then also some Asics. And while my wife's probably going to tell me I should get rid of some of my shoes, these are certainly some of the good ones that I do like to run in. And then lastly, the Mizuno Wave Riders. These are nice because they are neutral, high or moderate arch support, but these have a little bit of a higher heel drop, which might be good for someone maybe suffering from an Achilles tendinopathy or an Achilles issue, maybe a gastroc strain, or maybe a couple other issues like they aren't doing a very apparent heel strike and you want them to do more of a heel strike. So there's a lot of reasons why you might get them in the Mizunos. On a general rule, the New Balance do tend to be a little bit more of a neutral shoe. They also have some wider foot options, which is nice. And then a couple other brands also tend to be on the more cushiony side. And so getting out of the recommendations of neutral, obviously those more cushiony shoes tend to be those Hokas like we talked about before, and a couple other ones. Some Asics and some Nikes are really, really cushiony as well. In fact, there's new shoes that have a spring in them that have a lot of cushion in them as well. So again, there's always new research, new information coming out about shoes. There's tons of different information, and you can really get lost in shoes. Which leads me to my last point, and that is you want to put yourself in your runner's shoes. You want to kind of think about what shoes are going to be best for them. So it's important to do two things. One is to familiarize yourself with what shoes are out there and what their attributes are. Runners will ask you, what shoes should I run in? And obviously if they're passionate about running, might have some really, really strong opinions about which shoes they want to run in. So having a good knowledge or a baseline knowledge of different shoes that are out there, Asics, Mizunos are a great place to start. Nikes, New Balance are a great place to start. Brooks as well. Sauconys are good shoes. And then also you can start getting into some of the smaller brands like Mizunos, and then also maybe even getting into some of the brands like On, which are a little bit on the newer side. So one of the best ways is to research it. Go online, look at the different shoes, look at reviews. What are the different shoe options out there? But also go to your local running store and get your foot in a pair of shoes. Try a couple different shoes on. Take a little bit of a run around the store or just walk and see how they feel. And know the differences between high cushion, low cushion, minimal, supportive, high arch, low arch. And no matter what your anatomical makeup, obviously don't put yourself in a shoe that's going to hurt you no matter how short of a time. But note the differences between those shoes so you can tell runners with confidence, oh yeah, I've felt that shoe before and it feels like this, or it's really, really helpful for this. Now, there's obviously some resources you can use to help get yourself familiar with this. And we personally put on a whole clinic on this and certainly love this information. One of the things that we did was we created a running shoe reference guide. And in the running shoe reference guide, we go through a number of brands of shoes and talk about some of these attributes. We talk about some of the pathologies that might be associated with these running shoes. What are some of the considerations? Might they be good for a certain type of runner, but not another type of runner based on their running gait findings or their gait deviations? And then lastly, what are their attributes? Are they high heel drop? Are they low heel drop? Are they high arch support? Are they neutral? Are they max supportive? And some of the things like that. So if you do have an interest, feel free to grab the running shoe reference guide. And if you want to learn about gait analysis more, we do have the essentials of running gait analysis, which is for 6.5 continuing education units. And it is on a course you can purchase for online. In the meantime, get yourself familiar with running shoes, understand what's out there, and be careful when you're telling patients to run in a high cushion shoe. I am not saying it's not appropriate for all patients, but you just might want to be careful. If you do have that patient that you don't want a lot of stress to go through their body when they're running, maybe the high cushion shoe, well, I won't say maybe, I'll say the high cushion shoe is going to put more stress through their body, which is an important factor to think of. I'll see you soon. Take care, and please let me know if you have any questions.